Okay, hello everyone. Good evening. I warmly welcome our today's guest Aranya to our Permaculture Club, which is a kind of a special club, as you have read it in our announcement. Our association published his book on permaculture design this year, which was, I have to tell you, really nice, a beautiful um, project for me. And as the editor and the project manager of this publishing thing, I would like to tell you a few words about how I received it. First of all, I would like to emphasize how smooth the collaboration with Aranya and the English publisher, Paramount Publication, has been. Um, and um, and I was really astonished, and I also would like to thank you, Aranya, for being so generous with your knowledge. I have been working for about 20 years in publishing, and it's very rare to meet an author who is really so generous with his knowledge. And I also lived the same boundless creativity and generosity in our association while we were working on this book to get it published in Hungarian, and it was also important for us to adapt the content, the English content, to our local conditions, and we really wanted this book to be fully available to our Hungarian readers. And the permaculture teachers of our association really did everything, I have to say, they could to achieve this goal of us. So I'm really grateful for this wonderful experience and the flow of knowledge that we created here together this year. And as an end result, we got a book that provides a clear and reliable and really inspiring foundation for all of those who are not only interested, but I would say rather serious about permaculture design. And so this was a really nice process, and I'm so happy that you are here with us this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So first I would some technical issues for you, the participants. You can get your questions ready till the end. So the first part is going to be like an interview. We're going to ask questions and you can't talk, but at the end of this part of the evening, you can come back and personally ask questions from Aranya. And if you don't want to ask it personally, you can just write it down into the chat so we can interpret it to him if it's all right. I mean, yes. So, yeah.
I think just the technical that if anyone has, yeah, so you can put it in Hungarian as well in the chat.
Yes,
Translate it, that's
yes,
no
of
worries.
course. Yes, we can translate it if you want us to help. Okay. Thank you, Vicky, for sharing. Yes, that's the book we're going to talk about. And just to introduce some introductory sentence from us. I mean, my, how you say that? So first impression of Aranya, I did my PhD in 2005. And of course, I was so enthusiastic and I started my diploma just after my PDC, but I still haven't finished it. But the first thing I made a big impression on me, that was Aranya's portfolio of the permaculture design, because that was on CD. That's a really, really old edition first. Now you can access it through his page, a web page, which, as Vicky told, is really great that there's such a big knowledge in those 10 basic designs. And 20 years ago, for me, it was a great surprise that half of his design was about not land-based design, but if I can say really simple designs about his life, music, life path. So that's meant to me that, of course, you can do permaculture in really small, in really small parts of your life, you can apply those design things. So thank you for this 20 years. So the first question is like the personal part of this interview. I know it is quite impossible to distill your 30 years of permaculture journey down into 10 minutes, but we would appreciate if you give it a go, because we know you a bit throughout your books, but maybe for the others, it would be nice to know something.
Well, it's interesting that, yes, I mean, permaculture came along for me, well, originally in 1984.
Oh,
No, 86, 87. I left university. I did physics at university, which I really enjoyed at school. I had a really good teacher who was just inspiring, and he would give us things that we would learn by doing things, which is always the best way to learn, isn't it? You do things. We were making models. He entered us into a bridge building competition where you made a model bridge, and I was so excited about physics. And I went to university, and then I spent 3 years sat in lectures where there was no soul, and it was mostly maths, and I was just very disappointed by that whole process. And so I left university, and I wasn't really sure what to do with it. And I ended up 6 months later at an animal rescue place where people would bring dogs and cats mostly, and we would look after them while we were trying to find them homes. And I learned a huge amount there. I was there for 5 years, but while I was there, a woman came to help. We were all volunteers, but some of us were sort of living there and getting benefits while we were working full-time volunteering. And for me, it was really important part of because I started to learn about animals, because it wasn't just dogs and cats. We were just any farm animals. We had the runt of the litter that wasn't wanted, and we ended up with that. And we had ferrets and rabbits and all sorts of things, cows and everything. So I started to learn about animals, and also the founder's mother was a gardener, and so I started to learn about growing food. She was growing vegetables, and I was thinking, this is really exciting. I was in my beginning of my 20s, and then a woman turned up called Aranya, who had been traveling around Europe as a permaculture designer, and she had the first 2 permaculture books, which was called Permaculture 1 and Permaculture 2. And I glanced at them, and I love pictures. You probably see from inside the book the pictures and the power of the image. And I remember glancing through this and going, this is really exciting. And there was a photocopier, and I just photocopied everything because I was really busy looking after animals and helping to run the place. And but then I had this permaculture thing that kept pulling me back, and I found myself in 1996, so sometime later, I'd gone via doing some campaigns. I was a campaigns officer for 5 years, doing talks and those kind of things, and I ended up at a raw food house in southwest England. And one of the people who lived in the house, it was a shared house, was learning to become a permaculture teacher, and so he organised a 2-week permaculture design course in our house. At which point it was, oh, okay, right, I get to do it now. And I think for me, having done that 2 weeks of permaculture, I realized that having gone through my life saying, I don't want that, I don't want that, I don't want that, let's stop that happening. Suddenly it was, I can do something really positive with my life. And permaculture kind of gives me the tools to do that. And of course, back in those days, there were not many books. There was the big designer's manual that I had, which I was really lucky to get for very little money. I found it in a second-hand bookshop in the town for £15, which is, 18 euros or something. So it was, yes, very cheap. And so it was like I was meant to have it. And I still have it on my, I take it to my courses today as part of the library. People get to see it. But that was also full of lots of interesting pictures and so on. But I felt that it was not very easy to make sense of. There were lots of bits of information and inspiring things and techniques and strategies, but they were sort of here and there. And so I went to Ireland for a year, and I lived away from any modern things. No electricity. We had water from a well. We were 2.5 miles away from the nearest electricity. So it was a really interesting place to be. And that may not be so unusual in your part of the world, but here in this, to be even remotely away from electricity is quite difficult. And I found it was really interesting in terms of what I was able to perceive around me and plants and animals and things. It was kind of odd and different and really strange. Anyway, but I spent that year learning to grow food, and essentially, how do I use permaculture in my life? And the most obvious thing is to say, well, let's grow, use it to make sense of how do I look after myself with food and water and energy and those kind of things. And it was quite a shock, because there's not really many trees in that part of Ireland. So the local people would go and cut peat, which is, are you familiar with peat? Which is sort of grass that's over thousands of years on the bog. So it's very wet landscape, falls down and it rots, and it becomes this sort of very black, thick, deep layer of organic matter, which the locals cut, and then they stack it up, and then once it's dried a bit, then they go and bring it back and they use it as a fuel. So we had to do that, and there were 3 of us living there most of the time. It was a very small community. And we had to carry for about half a mile, sort of nearly a kilometre, with a wicker willow basket on our back, which was not very ergonomic, because it would just stick in and be quite painful. Quite heavy baskets of peat that we would carry, and so we didn't want to carry any more than we had to. So then that led us to, in the winter months, rather than us all living in individual places with our own fires, it made much more sense to have one fire, and we all slept around the same fire in the same room, which meant that whole kind of emotional thing, anything that came up that needed to be dealt with had to be dealt with. There was no running away, because it was easier to say, yeah, okay, let's sort this out, than it was to go and cut loads more fuel. So it was a very interesting year. And the reason I came back to Britain, or the rest of England, was that I just missed other people, and I loved the opportunity to go around the garden when we had the occasional visitor and showed them the plants, and we would pick salads, and they would say there's this plant and that plant, and that people would remember the plants that were important to them. Because when you get taken around a garden and shown 80 plants, it's very easy. I mean, I'm a bit of a completist. I would like to remember all those plants, and the lesson for me was that it was actually the plants that I was drawn to, or that I liked the taste of, were usually the things that I needed. We had one person who came who was a herbalist, and she was quite shocked at all the herbs that we were eating and the effect they had on us. But for us, it was just part of our diet. So I came back to England, and I started doing the diploma, as you say, which is the 10 designs. And because I'd spent a year on the land, I love gardens and I loved making gardens, but I didn't have many other people to garden for. There was one place I stayed, which is the steep garden. It's called the steep garden in my diploma. But mostly I was designing things to do with me, because I was in that stage of life where I was trying to work out for myself, what am I doing with my life, and how am I going to use this permaculture thing? And it was really, with the book itself that I ended up writing, was about my journey. I wanted to understand how to use permaculture and all of this stuff. How does it work if I start now where I am with the garden I have? How do I get from where I am now to where I want to be in the future? And so then it was just a case of organizing that information. And when I found myself starting to teach after I'd finished my diploma, then I needed to understand it in order to teach other people about it and share it with other people. So really, I kind of created the book to help me to understand it. And it's amazing. It's amazing that it's been so useful for everybody else. I mean, it's just, I never expected it to be anything like this. I don't think my publisher did either. It's been remarkable, and all, and very much thanks to my publishers, but also for all of you who have been involved in translating it into all of these other languages. So yes, so permaculture, often people say, oh, it changed my life, but permaculture really did change my life hugely.
That was a nice way of pathway. Another question is about your name. Is it a part of your permaculture, finding yourself identity thing, or?
It kind of was, yes. Okay, so this also goes back to where I was living in Ireland. So there was a whole bunch of different social experiments going on. From, we were barefoot on the land, so no shoes, no modern clothes. So we just wore linen and wool, just sort of wrapped around, tied on. It was very, I mean, we looked like strange monk kind of people, I guess. And there's the classic obvious things like you shave your hair off because that holds your history and all that kind of thing. And then there were other things like nobody is allowed to own anything. So if anybody used the words I, my, you could have I, but if you said my caravan or my little house or my garden, then it was like, no, no, we're all moving house. So it was very interesting. There was all of these things going on, and one of them was to leave your name behind, because your name also has associations. And the name I had when I was growing up was the most popular name for a boy when I was born. So I knew a lot of other people with the same name, and so often I would hear my name called and I'd turn around and it would be somebody else was being told. It's like, oh, it's not me after all. Anyway, so there was a short period where I wasn't really sure, it was like, what's your name going to be? And I said, I don't really know. I feel free because I don't have keys anymore, because there's nothing to lock up or anything. We're halfway up a mountain in old caravans with nothing of value to most people. And so suddenly I had no keys, and that was kind of very interesting. I felt free in that way. But then one evening I went up to see the other two she was reading Yogananda's, Paramahansa Yogananda's book, Autobiography of a Yogi, which I've never fully read myself. It was just one of the books that we had. And she said, oh, we're changing our names again, because they did that a lot. They kept changing their names with the idea that whatever your name is, if you take the name of a quality that you feel you don't have, and then people keep saying that word to you, then you take on that quality. So it'd be things like, I don't feel sure, so I'm going to take the name Sure. So, well, she took the name Sure, so she was, you would call her Sure, and he would be called Clear, and so on. And she also had some other very interesting names along the way. My favorite of which was I am you, you are me, which obviously was said as if it was a Japanese name. I am you, you are me, but it's the I am you, you are me, so anyway, so she said, Sanskrit, I'm going to become the mountain, which was Giri. So she was going to be the Giri, and he was more a sea, so he loved to be in the sea, so he became Sagara, which is the sea. And I'd been in the garden all day, and we had no music, no electricity. So, but I had songs that I remembered in my head, and I felt like the garden was kind of singing them to me. And it kind of seems strange in that environment. And this song was just going around in my head all the time from the 1980s called A Forest by a band called The Cure. And so she turned around and said, well, I'm the mountain, he's the sea, you could be the forest. It's like, yes, because that's been in my head all day. And it was one of those moments of, okay, yeah, that's fine. And she said, okay, so the forest is Aranya. I was like, oh, I like that. It just seemed very up and very positive. And so I took it in a very temporary way in 1997. And it's never become my name officially. There's no legal documents with Aranya written on, well, apart from, I suppose, my book. But and it did make it quite interesting because inside the cover there's something about the author reserves the rights of copyright to this book or something. You have to put your name, and I was thinking, well, it probably wouldn't hold up in court anyway because it's not my official name. So but I'm still, yeah, I really loved the name Aranya, and so I still use it because it just felt like it was given to me by the land. And it works for me. I love it. Yeah.
Thank you for the story. Yeah,
It's a big story.
yes, it is. That's maybe the end of the journey, but what does permaculture means to you now? At this after this long? Okay, no. Okay.
Permaculture, well, I suppose there's a difference between, for me, permaculture and permaculture design. So the book is called Permaculture Design. For me, permaculture is what we see in nature. So nature, all of nature has the ability to, well, until species go extinct, not from human fault, you know, but it's species run out of the sort of the genetic evolution. They just sort of hit a dead end. And we know that most species that have ever lived on Earth are now extinct, sort of 98% of them or something. But we still have this huge diversity of life on Earth, which is the leading edge of evolution across all species. And some things hardly change at all. So I think snails and slugs have been the same for a very long time. So, but because they're just, you know, they've evolved to be very good at what they do, they're niche. And so life all around us is doing permaculture. And I feel that we humans have stopped doing permaculture mostly, and that we need to go back to doing more permaculture. And that a design process, a permaculture design, is about helping us to get back to being more integrated with nature and to do permaculture. So permaculture is what we're trying to do. And of course, it looks different wherever you are. It's all about the relationship between us and the environment and how we meet our needs in that environment in a harmonious way. And so permaculture design is just a process to help us to get there with less trial and error, less mistakes, if that makes sense. So I think permaculture, and of course it's also, because it's about what we're trying to do rather than how we're doing it, permaculture has grown enormously in the last 20, 30 years, even just looking at the number of books. But of course, now we've got the internet and we've got people making fantastic videos and sharing things online. And so I think for me, permaculture it's kind of just become what I do in every aspect of my life. It's a set of tools that I've sort of embedded in myself and the way I interact with the world, in order to help me just make less mistakes and do things better. Yes, and just to, you know, with the important aspects being that wherever we are, it's going to look different. So we previously lived in a valley, not right at the bottom of the valley, but we didn't see sun till 10 o'clock in the morning, 10 a.m. And then, but now we see the sun come up because we're almost on the top of a hill. Now it's windier here. It was more sheltered there, but we have more light. So it's a different environment. And so whereas before we were concerned about, oh, we don't get so much light, how do we address that limitation? Now our key limitation is the wind and the lack of soil, because we have about 30 centimeters of soil and then it's rock underneath. So, and that's what happens on the top of a hill. So we have those limiting factors, and so the way we're approaching our need to meet our needs for food and water and so on has to take those. They're the limiting factors that we're mostly trying to address. So the idea of the design process is that we're identifying, mostly we have similar needs of food and water and so on, and then we have other things that we have, which we have in our lives as needs, that might be more about strategies than needs. If somebody says, oh, I need to play golf, well, they don't need to play golf. Golf is a strategy, maybe for the need of activity, or maybe having a social life. They're the needs. And then we can find strategies that support those needs, and that can vary depending on where we are. So the design process is a framework that just helps us guide us through that process of getting from where we are now to wanting to feel more integrated with the world in a more harmonious ecological way, to meet our needs for food and water and energy and so on. But we kind of still have to do the work, because we're the experts on where we are and what our needs are and what we're capable of. And so this is just to help guide us through that process. That makes sense.
Yeah, and you mentioned, sharing this knowledge or your view about permaculture that's integrated in the book. How was that process? When you really arrived at the decision writing the book, now sit down and write the book.
It didn't start as a book. It was a set of worksheets. So initially I was, when I first started teaching, I was teaching 2-week courses. So people would come for 2 weeks, and then there were very, very intense process. And then when I started teaching local courses, then it would be over weekends. So there would be one weekend, and then everyone would go home, and then 3 weeks later come back and do another weekend, and that would be usually through the spring. But often I would say, okay, so off you go and observe your garden, for instance, see where the sun is and where the wind is coming from and those kind of things, what plants are coming up at the moment. And then we'll come back and talk about it next time. And then 3 weeks later, some people will have done that, but lots of them just said, well, I didn't remember what I was supposed to do. And so then I created worksheets. So for every weekend, they would have a worksheet. Okay, this is the next bit. This is what you're going to do. This is the survey, the observation, or then the client interview and so on. And so I had these worksheets, and then somebody just suggested that maybe it could become a book. So it kind of did. And I wrote it, but I wrote it for me. And I was fortunate because I was teaching adult education. I was able to get Adobe InDesign software very, very cheap, because of course it's one of the things now is you pay a subscription for these things, and they're just mopping money out of us all the time. But it was something I could just make a one-off payment, which was very low because I was teaching adults within the education system. And then that enabled me to lay out the book, which for me was just really exciting, because I got to make all the decisions about the little icons in the corners and how the pages would, and I was editing it to fit the paragraph, so the paragraph just sort of fitted on the page, and so I essentially took the book as it is really to my publisher, and they just changed, I think, a little bit of white space at the top, and then put in a typo for the first edition as well, so the spelling mistake suddenly appeared in the first edition. But yes, so I am a little bit of a control freak, I would say, and I really enjoyed that process of creating it almost like a piece of art, really. So yes, that's how the book came about. So I created it, and then I kind of went to them and said, are you interested? And they were just, thankfully, they said yes. So.
And Aranya, can you just a little bit talk about, like, at that time when you published the book, how was the British permaculture kind of the story? How was it? So because I had the feeling when I first saw the book that this was really like a gap filling story, but I suppose that at that time in the UK that was the same. But like, how did it fit with at that time with the current publications and books on permaculture and works?
I very much, I didn't really see the point in writing the same book as somebody else. So I was writing a book that I didn't have yet. I love books, and my bookshelves are not behind me up here. But for many years, if it was a book published and it had permaculture in the title, I would buy it. And so I've got a great collection of permaculture books. But this was a book that didn't exist, and so I wrote it because I couldn't buy it. If that makes sense. And it was very much always written to be read alongside other books. So I wanted something that would fit in a large pocket or a small bag, so you could take it on site. I didn't want the designer's manual is lovely, but it's big, and to carry that around, it's not a very portable thing. And so I wanted something that you could take to your allotment or out into the garden, and you could use it on site rather than it just sitting on a table or on a bookshelf. So there was, a desire that maybe the edges get a little bit tatty through that process. And so, but because it had to be small in order to do that, a lot of what is also relevant is left out. So I'm referring to, if you want to know about soil, then go and read this other book about soil. So it's designed to go alongside other books, other permaculture books, and other, and videos and so on. So it's it's very much about that process. So
that's what we call salad book here.
Okay.
When you use it, it becomes a salad.
Okay.
And our next question is, so when I came to know the book during my PDC in the UK, I had a very, very strong feeling that this is a really pragmatic kind of approach to permaculture and permaculture design, and I had the feeling that if you go through the book, and that's what I did then, because during my BSc thesis in the university, I made a design for an open air museum, and basically your book was the main framework and the main tool that I used as for the process. And I had the feeling that it's really like, it's a process when you start with the book, with the process, and you just take your hand and take you through the whole process. And I have a question like, do you have examples from the past when someone without very thorough background in permaculture, just being enthusiast and started with your process with this book and just ended up with the permaculture system easily, just going through the design process, and don't make a diploma, they didn't have a PDC maybe even, but just by going through the book and apply what is written there and understand and apply, they just arrived to a good permaculture systems. I don't know if you had some good examples for that.
Not specifically, but it has sold 40,000 copies, over 40,000 copies, and there's not that many people. I mean, I don't know how many people have done PDCs, but I do meet, I meet people who've done PDCs with me in the past. Sometimes I go somewhere and they're working in a CSA or something, and it's really exciting. Oh, you're here, and and their lives, like mine, their lives have been changed by doing permaculture, by learning permaculture. So. Yeah, I mean, it was always intended to be a book, not to just sit and read, but to read a bit and then go and do it. It's, and to make it really clear how to follow that process. And for me, the permaculture design is the process. It's very difficult to go somewhere that is a permacultured site. Even here, for instance, somebody might come here and they look around and say, okay, well, I see some unusual plants that maybe most people are not growing. Maybe some ambitious plants. So we have pomegranate and custard apple and various different things growing in Cornwall, and the composting toilet, and so people, because we're used to looking at things, we're often look at the thing that's unusual and say, that's the permaculture. The compost toilet must be the permaculture, but it's not the compost toilet. It's the fact that the compost toilet is an element in our permaculture system that takes a waste product, which was previously going down the field in a septic tank system, and capturing it in a way that could then be put onto the garden. So it's the permaculture is how we put things together and to capture resources on the site. And the idea of the book is it just guides you through the process of thinking about those things, observing what you have, observing how the systems maybe could be improved. And the book I'm writing at the moment gets into a lot more detail about that, but that's not finished yet. So but the idea really is, yes, that it's to guide people through that. Maybe, you know, it could even be a book that doesn't even have permaculture in the title, you know, but it's just to help you in a process of getting here. But of course, permaculture is a word that's become very popular, and we know, you know, if you know what permaculture is, you know that, okay, that's what this is about. So it's a really nice word to help just give people a sense of what it is that the end point of this is about. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, sort of. That's an answer. And I was thinking in the meanwhile, like, was it what was what happened more often? Like someone crossed your book, read some part of it, and then they made the decision that, okay, I'm gonna do a PDC with Aranya. Or was it vice versa, that they did the PDC with you, and and of course by going through the process there, they said, okay, then I need the book so that when I'm at home and starting my own design, then that's gonna be helpful there. So
yeah,
it happened in
both.
the same.
Yeah. Sometimes people will come on the course because they've got the book. Sometimes they do the course and then they get the book. Yes, I mean, for me, it is very much about, during the PDC, the permaculture design course, you get to do well, here in Britain anyway, you get to do a design practice, but it's still quite a fast process. You don't get that much time to do it. Whereas when we're at home, we can sit down, we can spend much more time observing where we are, and going through that whole process of what our needs are. And because it's our, you know, if it's designing for ourselves, then we're invested in that. Maybe if you're doing a design on somebody else's place on the course, then it's quite fun, but it's not really that important to us because it's somebody else's place and it's somewhere else and we don't have much time to do it. Whereas at home, we can sit down and say, okay, so what do we want with our life? You know, what do we want to do with our garden? How do we want to feel more integrated with our community, whatever it is? And then this just is a way of helping support people through that process. Yeah. And of course, because it's about a process, you can go through it over and over again in different places. So
And you mentioned that you shouldn't even have to use the word permaculture just for the book or just for the topic. You could even use another word, or so it's the process what is important. And we had a question like, what was your experience with other professionals? Like, how did they approach your work and the book? I think about like professional landscape designers or people in other design fields. Like, did you have any experience when during collaborations that they understood the process, and how could you work with them? So
yes, I mean, often people have come on permaculture courses and said, you know, I did a degree in landscape architecture and we never learned any of this stuff, and it's all really important. So, and not specifically about the book, but just about permaculture. You do a PDC, permaculture design course, and there's so much in that just doesn't get taught as part of those courses. And that may have changed now. I don't know. That's, you know, certainly over 20 years. I've been teaching for 20 years. But yeah, yes. I mean, I'm encouraged by the number of things that I hear on the radio or the occasional thing on the TV or something that starts talking about things that we were talking about 15, 20 years ago. And now it's becoming mainstream. You know, even things like regenerative agriculture here is suddenly becoming more popular. The Oxford Real Farming Conference is happening next month. I'm going to be on a panel there, but there's something like 5,500 people going to that, and that's quite remarkable. Over 15 years ago, we were getting 50 people in a room, so it's exciting. It's exciting.
Yes, and then one specific question to the book. And Vicky, please, now you can go down to the slide. So what was always interesting for us, and also during the translation process, we had some discussion about how to translate some specific terms, and this is incremental design. So, and how the edit design goes. So we are really we would really like to know about your ideas and thoughts about, like, okay, you go through the process, you end up with a plan, with a design, you start to implement it, but then what happens? And like, really, like, what is incremental design for you now? And if you can just tell us some good examples. And yeah, so just as an experience for people, like, yeah, how the permaculture and permaculture designing goes when you are already in the process of implementing, and I don't know, like 10 years pass by, and like what happens then?
Yeah. So we moved here, my partner and I moved here 6 years ago. And as I say, it's windy. We're on the top of a hill, and there's about a meter and a half high retaining wall, but the land is higher on the other side, so very open, no hedging, nothing. The wind just comes over the hill. And we couldn't understand why didn't they plant trees and make a hedge? So one of the first things we did was that. And so there were some obvious things for us to do in the first year or two. And so we had what we would call our phase one design. What's the most key limiting factors that we had? One of them was that the soil's not very deep. We didn't really have much fertility. In fact, very little fertility. It was just grass. Pretty much the whole place was grass. It's about 0.2 of a hectare, to give you an idea of the size, which is big enough because we don't use machines other than there's a sort of solar powered lawnmower to do some grass around. But so we went through, and for me, seasonal cycles are very important. So you do something for a year, and then you see what happens, and then you respond to that. And perhaps the most interesting of all of these, because we are implementing things, but as we implement things, we get to learn more about our site. So, for instance, if we're planting trees, and I'm planting a number of trees at different places on the site, and then I can observe how those trees grow. And some trees don't grow as well, or they're doing this because it's windier than other parts of the land where they're bigger and they're more, and because you're spending a year, you're out in the land on a regular basis, you're seeing the places that are really sunny all the day, and sometimes there's, in the winter, the shade lines, the shadow can be very deep in certain places. So just becoming more familiar with our site, which then makes us think about how we might change things. And one of the things on this site is that the land was divided in two by a 2.5 meter high retaining wall. So the land did that, and then it went 2.5 meters and then did that. And so it wasn't easy to go from here to here. You had to go a long way around. But then the wall started falling down, so we had to get it terraced, which meant that we could have steps, which now connects the two halves of the land. That was much better. And we'd started off early in our site design wanting a composting toilet. Where's it going to go? And there's the exclusion method that you're probably familiar with, which is essentially, well, we can't put it there because that's too much in the public. That's too slopey. We couldn't build on that. That's too wet. That's too windy. And the land in the courtyard is too precious because that's our best microclimate. And so we started off, and there was nowhere to put the toilet. There was just nowhere it could go. And this is very frustrating. But essentially at that point, we'd say, well, we can't do anything about it because there's nowhere to put it. So let's just forget that for a while and see what happens. And then sometime later, through a series of events, which are just too long-winded to talk about now, but essentially we got to a point where suddenly there was somewhere we could put a compost toilet. And so we were able to build that and then create that process, if you like, the element that processed human manure into something that's then safe to put on our trees and such. But wasn't something that was immediately obvious. So we had to sort of let that go. And then when it became possible to do that, then we came back around. So there are some, so we're sort of still implementing some things from a couple of years ago, but as part of that process, other things come up and then say, okay, so now we can also design this. So the design process is you're sort of going through, but you keep looping back, and then you know more now over here, so you can go back and do this other thing. And there's kind of multiple streams, multiple phases of design going on at the same time. Does that make sense? In practice, you just do it. It all makes sense. But yes, it's definitely not a straight line from one place to another, because from here you can only see so far into the future. And then when you get here, then there's more you can see. Like any kind of journey, you go over a hill and it's like, oh, I can see so much more from this hill. And now I know where I want to go next. And it's pretty much like that. And all the time you have a place, a garden, or a home, or whatever it is you're designing, you're in that space, living in it, interacting with it, and responding, doing the observe and interact that David Holmgren talks about. His first principle is we're observing what happens, we interact, we do something, and then we observe what happens having done that thing, and then we interact again. So it's kind of linear because we experience it time in that way, but it's also cyclical, that you keep coming back around and tweaking it and doing something else. And yeah.
So yeah, hearing that, I assume that you say that we can be relaxed on changing our systems when the environment or our strategies changes, just because, starting permaculture designers as starters, we always think that, we have to do everything at the first stage, in putting 80% into designing and have a brilliant design which have with succession and everything, and for a 100 year or something like that at least. But then you say that we can be more relaxed on that.
I would say yes, definitely. Probably there was a time 20 years ago when I would have said, I want to do it all now. But now I realize that it's important to be in that process because we don't know everything immediately. And to be relaxed about it, yes, and just to do something, because there's a process in dragon dreaming. I'm just going to mention it briefly. And part of dragon dreaming is, well, it's all to do with working in groups to achieve projects, to have successful projects working in a group. And there's 4 stages of the project. There's the dreaming, that's coming up with the ideas, the planning, how are we going to do it, the doing, the actual doing, and then there's the celebrating. And each of us tends to be drawn to or good at certain parts of that. So I love thinking about things. I'm very much a dreamer, planner, so I'm really good at coming up with ideas and sort of planning some of them. But then often I'll get stuck going from planning to doing, which also includes finishing my second book. But I did finish this one, which was good. So so the thing that helps me to get over from the planning to the doing, because in my mind I'm thinking, have I thought of everything? Have I remembered everything? If I've forgotten something and I do this thing, am I going to make a big mistake? Yeah. And so it helps me to have somebody who's more of a doer, who my partner is. She's very much a doer, and to support me, to give me the confidence. So let's just do this and see what happens, And so we're a good team because I'm good at the planning and the dreaming, and she's good at the doing and a bit of the celebrating, I think, as well. But she's, yeah. So, yeah, yes.
Thank you. And then moving forward a little bit to the bigger context or the wider context, we had a question like, what do you think, like, how did your design framework and basically the book and the method contribute to and form permaculture development and movement in the UK and above? So
pretty much everything that went into my book was things that people were already talking about in the design frameworks. I think what I've done is organize it to make sense for me. And I don't know if I'm quite on the spectrum, but I might have a bit of that about just wanting to organize things and make sense of it all. which of course is very useful for me. So, but I think, I mean, there are things I think that in terms of part of that approach that I take with the book, things like systems, elements, systems and functions and those kind of things that people didn't really talk about so much in the past, that just made sense to me to organize it when I was writing it, that people talk about a lot now. But I think, you know, all of these things have come from people who've had ideas about how to put things together with different organizations. You know, all of the, when I get my seeds out, there's some beautiful seeds here. It's not the yin yang beans, but beans. I mean, beans just are amazing, aren't they? And some people in the past have bred that bean, bred those beautiful beans, and they've gifted them to us now. But we have no idea, unless, of course, they've got the name of the person who's bred that variety. But mostly, there are gifts from our ancestors that have just been given to us, and collectively, as humanity, we now have this beautiful array of foods that we can grow for ourselves, you know, breeds of animals and vegetables and fruits and all kinds of things, which in a sense are, you know, one of my responsibilities is to keep that and pass it on to our descendants. I don't have children myself, but, you know, future children who are going to take on the world and to pass on these gifts. So in a sense, the ways of doing things, it does feel quite similar to the physical things we have, the genetics of plants and animals and so on, because there's still things that they kind of have become anonymous in the sense that we don't necessarily always know where they came from. But the important thing is that we have them, and that I feel very happy that I've created something that's been very useful to people, as well as me, and that's something that can go forward into the future and continue to be so. Yeah.
I have one more specific question to the international context, like so what do you think, like how this design process that you describe in the book relate to the Australian let's say original framework that Bill Mollison used and that they use in his school? Like, did you have experience with students coming from that school learning from you as well, or so were there any cross-pollination, or so do you have any ideas on that? Because I suppose here, at least here in this part of Europe, we have quite often students going to the Australian school as well, and some people in in your school, and like we are happy to know your ideas on that.
Yes, I mean there's always cross-pollination, and that's a very interesting edge, isn't it? Obviously in Australia they had very different issues. I mean there was the oil issue, which was a fairly global thing because that was, but also within the Australian context they have lots of very salinated, very poor old soils, and so they had very specific issues. But I would say the earlier, you know, the designer's manual and so on is very much about lots of strategies and techniques collected into a book, that in the tropics you can use this, in the drylands you can use this. But I didn't feel that there was any organized process. So I think, and my book sells very well in Australia, so I think that it's just a complementary thing. It was always intended to be something that sat alongside the other books. I mean, yes. I mean, my first permaculture books were Australian books. So, and that's where, you know, in the sense of being given a name, permaculture, but of course, a lot of this wisdom comes from Indigenous people from all over the world as well. So, including our ancestors who kind of lived in Europe, apparently before Britain was cut off, which was 8,000 years, only 8,000 years ago, that you could walk across to Britain. And of course, people being more migratory probably in those days, and mostly people lived around the outside the coasts and rivers. They didn't go inland very much. And so there was a very small population in Britain. Britain is it's a very interesting place because the English language is really a mixture of loads of different languages, from French to Spanish to Norwegian and Dutch, and all. Anyone who's come to Britain to invade at some point has brought some of the language. And of course, the genetics of us living here as well is very diverse now. But yeah, so 8,000 years ago, there was hardly anyone living here. So, but we all have ancestors, and they all had to survive in this landscape before we had all of the technology we have today. So it's, yeah, I'm not sure where I've gone with all of that, but yes. So Australia, I mean, there's native wisdom wherever you go, wherever humans have lived before. And I think Mollison and Holmgren were just gathering that up and just saying there's all of these things we could do, and let's not forget about them. And I think wherever permaculture has gone, it's picked up part of that culture and added it to the overall permaculture. And we have so many people doing permaculture all over the world now, and so much wisdom and ability to specialize in different areas. I mean, it's such a rich, it's such a rich thing. It's really fantastic to be a part of that.
So, and your new book is a surprise for me. I mean, the news of your new book. But the last question, or maybe you don't have to answer it then. So over the last decades, the design tools have changed and become more accessible, of course. And do you think there is a need to be revise your book? I mean, the old book, but maybe there's the answer that you're writing a new one.
Yes, but it's very interesting because I started making just a little document of the things that I would change about my book. So if it was revised, because usually somebody at some point says, oh, let's revise this book. And I had this in mind that at some point I would need to do that. And that was 2012, so nearly 14 years now. But it's got so little on that document, it's just not worth it. So I'm still very, very happy with the book, which is fantastic. But what I've been writing is all of the things that are not in the book. And so if you go and look at a permaculture site, you see the things. As I said before, we see things, we don't see connections so easily. In order to see the connections, we need to spend time, and so that's in nature observation, you do sit spot. So you sit and you just sit there and see what happens, what's going on, who lives here, and where are the creatures that live in this space. And on any other kind of site, we observe who lives there, and that includes the people who are living on the site. So what do people do? And we observe ourselves. So with the zoning, and I would say the book is good. It's useful to have a little bit of introduction to things like zoning before you get into the book. So it's not an absolute beginner's book, but it's also not a difficult book either. It's designed to be, if you know a bit about zones and sectors and those kind of things, then it will make sense of all that, because this helps you to put it all together. But for us, we're in the kitchen and it's like tonight, it's wet and windy and it's dark, and oh, what are we going to have? And inevitably it's going to be, well, we'll have the things that are closest to the back door. I'm going to go and pick some things, but I'm not going all the way up there to get some kale. We're just going to pick some leeks out of the garden, something like that. So it becomes very obvious very quickly when you inhabit a site, this idea of zoning. So we go from zoning as being a theory. Well, if it's further away, then you might not interact with it so much too. Yeah, I can't be bothered to go all the way out there in the wind and the rain. And that on a nice night, then I'm very happy to do that. But if it's not very nice, then I'm not going to do that. So it's so it's looking at those relationships. Yes, so this is what I was talking about, wasn't it? So the layers beneath. So we see the things, but unless we understand the relationships, why have they put a compost toilet there? Why is the greenhouse over there? Why are the vegetables there? If we don't understand the reasoning for that, and that might need to come from observing the people for a while. So now I see why they've done that, because I can see these things. So we start to see connections between things. We start to see maybe why is that thing the shape it is? Maybe that's not obvious, that somebody's made a dome with a net over it. Why is it that shape? Well, that becomes clearer. So we start to see we see relationships, we see flows, we start to see things that are going on beneath the surface. And then that's the deeper level of permaculture. So my book is the one I'm writing. It's called Deep Permaculture, because it's kind of about deep ecology, our connection to nature, ourselves as part of nature, but it's also about let's just go deeper and let's look at the levels beneath, because often what will happen is we'll teach permaculture principles, and sometimes that we need to make things simple to get to learn them. But then if we simplify them too much, then we lose part of it. And so things like multiple elements for each important function, which is a very common one, often will only be applied in certain situations, but there are many other ways in which we can use that. So it's sort of, it's almost a summary of a bunch of things. But if we lose all of the detail beneath, then we lose some of the ability to make good decisions. Does that make sense? So yeah, and it's a whole other thing that nobody else has written about. So of course I have to write about it. So that's the next one. I'm hoping to finish it in the next couple of months. So
That's great. So we don't have to wait long to continue.
Well, it takes a while to get it published, but yes.
Great. I think
just by listening to the content, it sounds like quite interesting and relevant for us as well.
Yeah, it's a bigger book, but yeah.
It just passed 8 o'clock, so I think we should open up your club meeting. And I really would like to ask Bela if he can come and meet with us and you. He is one of the translators. Bela, are you here? Yes.
Yes, I am.
Oh, you don't
But
have.
I can't really. I don't really know what can I say. Hello, Aranya, by the way.
No,
Hello.
just me. But you don't have your video on, and you don't have video.
Well, I try to.
Right. No, it's just an opportunity to say hello and for us an opportunity to thank you.
My video doesn't want to work.
Operate, no. Oh, it's no pressure. It's just if you just have anything to say, or because your point of view is just totally different from all of us, because you're in a special
I
position.
will have a ghost voice without a face. So I can't really say anything interesting, except that it was a very hilarious work, because permaculture is not really simple to translate into any other languages, and it has some very special terms, very special concepts, which we need to find, as the others said. We had to find a common Hungarian understanding or a equivalent term, and it was not easy. So Vicky was very instrumental in finding you or reconciling in those various ideas and concepts. But I think the end result has proven well. So I think the book is good in Hungarian, just as well as you wrote in English.
It looks fantastic.
Okay, that's absolutely beyond me, because I only did the written translation. So all the other details were in the hand of Vicky.
Thank you, Vicky.
Well, thank you to all of you, because yes, this is
It was a pleasure, nevertheless, and I also wrote a lot. Also learned a lot during the way or the process, because it was absolutely different from all my other translation projects which I had so far.
Great. Yes, it's such an important thing, because obviously I don't know any Hungarian, so I can't do that job. So it's
Well, Hungary as a Hungarian language is very easy. In this country, 2 years old kids can speak it, so just don't give up.
Okay.
Okay, so Thank you, Bela.
Okay.
We received some questions, but you can ask personally, Daniel, if you want to, or we can read it out loud if you don't want to ask it. So there is an opportunity for you, but maybe that's why you wrote it down. So the first question is, what do you suggest to someone who is after completing a PDC and want to start to work for clients?
Right, something's happened to my camera, hasn't it?
Yes, something.
Suddenly seemed to be very close. I don't know what's going on there. Well, within the book, I mean, it's always better. The joke here is plastering. When you plaster a wall, you sort of up the wall. That you don't practice on your own house. You plaster somebody else's house, and then you do your own. So, and I suppose a little bit like that with permaculture, but it's yes. I mean, I think often it's to do with confidence, isn't it? But if you know more than somebody else, if you know a bit more permaculture than somebody else, even if you feel like you don't know a lot more, you're still helping them because you know something. And we learn by doing, I get confidence from doing it. Most of what I've learned from teaching has been learning from the people who are on the course. Obviously to begin with, when I was working with other teachers, as an apprentice teacher, but then people come on the course, landscape designers come on the course, landscape architects and so on. And then I learned things from them as well, and other farmers. And so when I'm standing in front of a class teaching a group of people, there's actually about 1,000 of me. All the people that have done a course with me in the past, I'm, what I'm teaching is what's the word I'm looking for? All the knowledge that's come from all of those people is just coming through me, if that makes sense. And it's the same that it's good to just start and do what you can and be honest and just say, it's like when you're learning to teach, it's always a good idea to have some notes on a clipboard, and not to be afraid to look at the notes. So, oh, what am I doing now? Okay, let's have a look. I'm not infallible super person. I'm just going to look at what I've got. So, okay, so yeah, okay. Or if you don't know, just say, sorry, I don't know. I could try and find out, or we could look at ways of finding that out. But if you don't know, you don't know. So just support other people in the way that you can. And the book, I mean, one of the things the book does have in here is how to work for a client, in a very basic way, but the kind of things you would include. So if you're going to provide a design for somebody, what are the things you would give them? And it's there in the book. So the idea is to support you in designing for yourself, but also enabling other people to do permaculture as well, and as much as possible to help them understand it, because the best, what often happens in these kind of situations, professionally, so a landscape architect might go somewhere and do a design and then say, right, off you go, and then I'm going somewhere else, and so something changes, like the economic situation changes, or something happens with the climate or something, and then the clients are then saying, oh, what do we do? I don't know. We weren't actually involved in the design process, so we don't know what to do. Whereas if you're working with somebody and just supporting them through that process, then they say, well, hang on a sec, I remember what we did now. We were looking at this and that was important. And so people are much better empowered to then fix things for themselves when they change, which they inevitably will. Yeah.
Oh, the second question, Daniel, relates to that, because that's about have you made what was your biggest mistakes during, I think, when you were a designer, and how did the clients accepted them, or were you honest to tell them that was a mistake?
Mostly, I would say my biggest mistakes have been for me, rather than for other people, which is always a great relief, isn't it, to do things and say, oh. But the funniest one was that with the compost toilet, so I had an idea where it was going to go on the land here, and I was in a hurry because we were having a PDC, a design course here, and I said, I want a compost toilet, and now I know where we're going to put it. And we had some friends here who live nearby who also did a PDC. I got to know them through that process. and he builds. He's he's got various different skills, but he's very good at making nice structures, and he's made a lovely compost toilet, bespoke compost toilet for somebody else on another permaculture project, and he was going to come and help with that, and then he couldn't do it, and so we didn't have the compost toilet for the course, and it was a bit disappointing. Then about 3 months later, we realized that it would have been totally in the wrong place. And so it was, well, thank goodness we didn't do it, because that would have been a terrible mistake. And now it's in the right place. Does that make sense? So sometimes, you know, if you're not sure, or sometimes the universe sort of helps out. And it's, yeah, that was disappointing that we didn't get to do it. But actually, it was really good that we didn't do it, because that would have been wrong. And yes, and Bill Mollison has always said this thing of don't do anything in the first year that you might regret, like putting up a building. And a compost toilet is quite a small building, but it does involve, here at least, digging quite a big hole to put some tanks in and building a structure over the top of that to then put the building on. So it wouldn't have been something we could just easily move. So yeah, I would say, you know, the great thing about that mistake was that we didn't actually get to the point of implementing it. It was only a theoretical mistake. And they're the best.
Do mistakes on paper?
Exactly, yes.
Right. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, you can ask questions in Hungarian as well, or you can put your video or, I mean, camera on or microphone and you can ask it. Come on, guys. 27 of us. I think Zsuzsi asked the question, but it's quite the same we asked already. So if she's not... Oh, what's the smallest one?
Hello.
Hello.
Nice to meet you, Aranya.
Hiya.
Yes, my question is nearly the same as you asked before, but I would be happy to hear a little bit more about it. Are there how permaculture design is evolving around you or in the United Kingdom? I mean, in methods and typical ways how the process or maybe the things what we would like to design for the kind of projects.
Yes.
There's any typical changes in that?
I would say, yeah, it's well, everything evolves, doesn't it? And communities, you know, we are an organism of permaculture people doing interesting things in the world. And so a friend of mine called Luby, who interestingly, when I was learning to become a teacher as a teaching apprentice, she was also becoming a teaching apprentice with me. So we sort of came through on the same level. And she's written a lot about people in permaculture. In fact, she's really good at writing books. I don't know how she manages to find the time because she's got 2 children and a busy life, but she just keeps knocking out books. But her focus is on social permaculture, cultural emergence, and so on. And they're really brilliant books. And it's interesting because I start, you know, with my design portfolio, my diploma portfolio. I was very interested in, you know, how to design processes and that kind of thing. But I've always been a bit more of a, I don't know, antisocial person. But I'm very happy on my own as well, you know, my partner. But we're both very good in the sense of we'll take our own space and then we'll come back together and do things together. But I'm quite happy for people out there to do whatever they want. When we had a lockdown here for COVID, you know, and we couldn't go any for 18 months, I think, something like that. I was really happy just pootling around in my garden. In fact, I made my online course while it was going on. So yeah, I don't feel a great need to do the social bit. Does that make sense? I mean, I know I'm here, but and I love teaching courses because that's a very special experience. But these days, you know, the last 10 years or so, my focus has been, okay, so what's the really most important thing? It's important that we get on with each other, and social permaculture is important, but you know, we still need food and we need water and we need energy. And how do we do those things? Because they are sort of, without those things, then they're kind of things that if they run out, then that's probably the fastest way for us to all die, not very nicely. So that's become, so I'm fascinated by how to use permaculture in different designing ways. And also because Luby's doing that, lots of other permaculturists are doing social design and people care stuff. People care stuff. I don't mean it's out there, because people care is obviously very important, but social design, I don't feel I need to focus on that because other people are doing that really well. And so I don't need to be writing about that or doing, courses about that or so on, because that's not my main area. If that makes sense. I just love design and land. I love land. I love gardens, forest gardens, those kind of things. And that's just what, it's my little niche within the diversity of people doing permaculture. So I would say, certainly here in Britain, we're getting very diverse in what people do. And of course, some people love certain design processes. So sometimes if I'm looking at design work, portfolios, diploma portfolios, some people will focus a lot on homegrown principles, whereas other people not so much. I feel that the homegrown principles are really interesting, but you kind of have to read the book to understand. It's that sort of deep permaculture, to understand the levels, what's going on behind each little sentence. There's a whole chapter, and people tend to learn it as, a sentence, observe and interact. But what does that mean? Well, there's a whole chapter about it. And so in order to, and doing a design portfolio, then you can get to understand it a bit more by practicing going through that process. So yes, I think in Britain, probably all over the world, but we're getting to be taking permaculture into lots of different places, which is very exciting. So, and I just do one little bit of that.
Thank you very much. We have the same experience about social permaculture and communities and so on. Yes, we see it on PDC courses that everybody interested in these topics. So yeah, maybe it's more and more important. Thank you very much.
That's all right. That's okay.
Okay. Two small question came. I mean, one small and one big. What was your smallest and what was your biggest design?
For me,
Yeah.
the smallest and biggest design. Well, probably the biggest design is the one that we're in the middle of now. Mm-hmm. My partner and I decided that we wanted to find somewhere for a rest of life project, as we call it. So we're both over 60 now, but just that we're still hoping to live for another 30 years or so. And so where could we be that would keep us busy for that time? Because the previous place we lived had a tiny garden that was really good for how do we fit all of these different things into, stacking things, lots of functions and species into this tiny space. And we also had a guerrilla forest garden sort of in a wild space that we were just sort of hiding all these plants in there. But we wanted somewhere that we wouldn't run out of things to do. And so we feel that that's where we are. So that's certainly the biggest design because it's ongoing. Smallest design was probably that little office in the caravan. I mean, certainly in terms of physical size, it was 2 meters by 1.5 meter little room in a caravan. So that was a pretty small design from a physical perspective. It took me a little while to figure things out, but yeah, there's a fair bit in there, but that's probably the smallest design.
And the one you mentioned, so the biggest one, your place is the one that you were already talking about. So where you actually is based, or that's gonna be a new land somewhere?
No, that's where we live now, where we've been living for 6 years. Yeah, so yeah, it's still not big enough because there's always, the big things. You need more space for things like trees. You need quite a lot of room for trees, but if you're just trying to fit in some interesting herbs and food plants, they don't take up so much room. It's just the trees need the space. So, and camping, which is interesting because we run courses here, we need some space for camping, but that means it has to be grass and then, or sort of herbs, little grassy herb things. So there are certain parts of the site which are just kept for camping for 2 weeks a year, and then it's sort of, well, but then we still need the camping space. So it's quite interesting figuring all this out and how many tent spaces do we need and that kind of thing. So yeah.
Okay, the last question is a big one, but maybe you can, I don't know, say it's about is there any connection between permaculture and like healthy lifestyle or dietary needs or eating habits? That's a big question, but do you know somebody who's specially focusing on that topic?
Yeah, me.
Wow, good.
Yeah, I've always been interested in health generally. I used to run a lot when I was in my teens and my 20s and so on. And I've always been interested in diet and health and how that works. So yes, in the book I'm writing at the moment, I've written a whole chapter about designing, how do we permaculture the body? Because we've talked a lot about permaculturing their social systems and how we think about things, but nobody seems, and there's lots of books about how to be healthy, and they tend to come from lots of different directions. So there's lots of different diets that you could be raw, you could be keto, or you could be this or that, or you could do yoga or Pilates or running or whatever it is. Loads and loads of different things. So I've tried to make sense of that more from a pattern perspective and just saying, what are the key things? Well, we do need to be moving. We know from nature that even if you take wolves out of the landscape of Yellowstone, then the elk don't move so much, so they become less healthy because they're not moving very much. And the importance of movement and diversity of what we eat. So whatever we eat, it's good to be diverse and to try and be seasonal, because that's what our ancestors designed to do. So just certain patterns within thinking about that. Does that make sense? So it's quite a big chapter in the book. But it feels really important to be in there, because if we look at, so coming back to systems, have I talked about systems? Probably not. So the new book talks a lot about systems thinking, and looking at systems from simple things like, how do we collect rain off a roof? So the water, when water falls out of the sky, not very much of it goes into your water tank directly. It goes onto a roof and then into a gutter and then down a downpipe and maybe through a filter, and so there's all these different parts to the system. But in terms of how much water do we need to save, well, then you have to sort of look at the end user and you say, okay, well, how much water do the plants need? Because that's where it's going. In my garden, I'm collecting water to water my plants, to irrigate my plants with. How much water do the plants need? Well, that depends on how much water storage the plant has in the soil. So if I build up the soil, then the soil can hold more water and drain well. Obviously, you want it to drain well, but to hold more water, which means that then I don't need so much water in the tanks. So the end user of your system is always very important, because that determines what you need. It's the same as if we all use lots of electrical devices, we need more power stations, which has more of an impact on the environment. So if we can be healthier, and particularly as we get older, there are things that we struggle. We all tend to have something that's a problem in terms of our health, whether we've injured a knee when we were running a lot as a child, or whatever it is that maybe makes us slightly less efficient than maybe our ancestors would have been at some point. But if we can improve our digestion, for instance, then maybe we don't need to eat so much food, or maybe if we eat better quality, we don't need so much quantity. So there's all of these different aspects but if we're looking at the end, so rather than thinking our washing machine or our fridge needs to be an A++++, whatever it is, efficient thing, because that's good, but all of our systems are going somewhere. We're watering our plants, we're putting heat, we've got logs that go into the wood burner that warm the house, but then if it's not a very well insulated house, then we need to put more logs in the wood burner to stay warm, because we're losing some of that heat. How do we improve the efficiency of the end user? And so it's always looking at those systems and just saying, where is this going? What's the end point? How do we make that better? And it's not always possible to make it perfect, but how could we make it reasonably easily? that bit better, that reduces the demand on the system. That means we don't need to buy so many plastic water tanks or whatever it is that our system is built from. Is that making sense? And then each of those different elements in the system have different properties. So with something like a solar panel, often we're told, okay, so your battery runs out, so you need more solar panels. And that's the economic approach, because you can sell more solar panels to people if you say you need some more solar panels. But it might just be that the solar panels are in too shady a spot. You know, maybe a tree has grown over the last 5-10 years since they've been put in, and now they're in a bit of shade and they don't get so much sun. Maybe the panels just need moving. Maybe they just need cleaning. You know, where we are now, we get salt off the sea. We're a mile from the sea. Sometimes we get salt comes in and it sits on the panels, and then they don't work so well. So maybe they just need cleaning. So because nobody earns any money from, well, especially if you clean your panels and don't get somebody else to do it for you. But, you know, selling products is what makes the economy work, you know, and so we're always encouraged to buy stuff when actually we don't necessarily have to. And so the idea of looking at the different properties of the different elements is that what could we change that is cheaper, simpler, quicker than the thing that we're normally told to do, which is usually buy something. So
there are two more questions coming up from the audience. One is about climate change and how does climate change changes permaculture designing, especially the methods or tools that we apply during designing. What do you think, like, what climate change causes and changes in your approach or generally to the?
I would say, I mean, it's just it's information that comes in, and of course we can observe things directly. So I could be measuring directly on my site how much it rains, you know, with a rain gauge, or how much sun we get on our solar panels. But of course, that can change as the solar panels become less efficient over time. It's not necessarily a reflection of that we're getting less or more sun. It might just be the panels. But I can make direct measurements, and I can respond to things that I'm hearing from elsewhere. And I've always felt that if the climate is change, you know, if the climate changes, certainly we're seeing lots more. It feels like to me, who's lived 60 years, that it's a bit more volatile, the weather, than it used to be, you know, a bit more changeable. Sometimes we get stuck in, every week we get another load of rain come. It's feeling a bit like that at the moment. And if that is the case, then maybe it's a good idea to act upon that, because if we don't, then we might then turn around and say, oh, yeah, that did happen, didn't it? And we should have done something about it. So it just feels like it's an input. And then when I'm designing, so for instance, planting trees, because we've been getting some hotter summers, and of course, here in Britain, we don't always get hot summers because we're very close to the sea. So we've got a bit more of a cool temperate climate, more than the continental, the heat you get in the summer months and the cold in the winter. So I'm planting some things in my garden which are not going to be staple plants, but I'm putting in things, you know, we've got a pomegranate bush, we've got persimmon tree, we've planted some Asamina custard apples as well, a pair of those because they need 2 for pollination. We've had success with apricots before, and we've got the sort of standard figs and things. So there are things that I put in our garden that if we have long hot summers, then they'll succeed. But then they're there as, you know, because without so one of the things, multiple elements. So let's go back to multiple elements for each important function, which is one of the sort of classic permaculture principles. So you could look at that as, okay, so I've planted a lot of pear trees and apple trees and cherry trees and whatever, and they're different. So they're multiple trees for the function of providing food, fruit, whatever. But if all of those trees don't do well, if we have a wet, cold summer, then there's not much resilience in that, because I don't have diversity in terms of response. There's something called response diversity. which again is one of the things I'm writing about in the new book, which is that if it's a hot summer, some things will do well, but if it's a cold summer, wet summer, then other things will do well. But you'll always have something that's doing well and some things that don't do so well. So there's resilience in that, which there isn't if you're just planting lots of things that are always going to be unhappy if it's wet. So we've got some things that will be happy if it's hot, and things like pears are quite happy with a wet. Pears like a bit of moisture. So on a wetter summer, we'll get lots of pears, and in a hotter summer, we might get lots of apricots. So it's not quite that simple because it's also about pollination time. But the diversity is also to do with how things respond to change. And so if climate is changing and is becoming less predictable, then it's good to put different things in your system which respond so that whatever happens, something will do well. Is that making sense?
And the last question, a funny one, or at least a nice one. If I understood well the question, then the question is like, what was the most surprising design project that you had, like, which was, I don't know, that you applied permaculture design process for, and it's surprising.
It's a surprising question. I don't know. A surprising idea.
It can be unusual or just.
Yeah. I mean, I've become very fascinated by, as a physicist or somebody who was a physicist and likes to see the world in that way, by electroculture, because electroculture, for many years, I thought it was just people, using electricity to grow plants. And then I realized it's all to do with the atmospheric electrical circuit, which is where we inhabit, and that there's a constant flow of electricity traveling from the ground to the sky. It's a tiny current, but it's also the order of the currents that flow in our body. And so we're connected into that system. If we take our shoes off or put our hands in the soil, we absorb that natural electricity. But the electricity is looking for the easiest path to the sky, which is usually trees. So where you see people putting metal antenna, actually you could just put trees, and they do other things as well. But often when we've seen people in the 100 years ago, when people were putting antenna, it was because they were growing small things like grapevines, and they wanted something that would attract the ground electricity. So I was surprised when I started looking into electroculture, because I thought it was probably there might be something in it, but mostly rubbish. And then I realized that actually there's lots of really interesting things going on in that realm. And often people aren't doing it very well because they're just putting a little short wire, which will conduct a bit of current, but it's not very tall. The higher and it's not an antenna, but the higher your wire is, the more voltage you have, which gets more current. But in the past, people would put up 6-meter high aerials antenna. Mostly these days they're only 2 meters high or something, and there's buildings around and there's trees, and that doesn't really help that much because there's not enough. It's not making enough of a difference. But yeah, it's I would say it's very interesting and surprising. I was surprised by that. So I'm exploring because one of the challenges we have is we've got a conservatory, which is our kind of greenhouse, and it doesn't have a ground, it doesn't have an earth for the soil, so the electrons can't get into the soil in the planters. So I'm going to put in a system of wires to bring the electricity through the beds and then up an antenna and just see if that makes a difference. So, but yeah, I've been very surprised by the science of that. Richard Feynman actually had a lecture about atmospheric electricity. So this is a proper thing. People get struck by lightning and die. It's not a small thing, but I would think that's probably the most surprising. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Nice story. And I have a last question for you. It's about the diploma program that you have, and how does it intercalates with the book. So what I saw in the UK when visiting your PDC and then doing my PDC, that basically the design process, what you describe in the book, is really in connection with the PDC you hold. So it's kind of like two sides of one thing. And my question is, do you have such a direct connection also to your diploma mentorship? So, or how does it interrelate, or how do you see the process of someone graduates as PDC using your book and the method that they learn there, and what's next, and how does the diploma program works?
Okay, there's quite a lot in there, isn't there? The diploma, I mean, for me, the diploma is an opportunity to get support while you're doing designs to learn. The best way to learn permaculture design is to do designs whenever you get the opportunity. And I would say design what you're interested in. So, you know, we want to make a garden, we're going to design the garden. So, or if you want to get a new job, change your livelihood, design changing a livelihood. You know, design what you're interested in, because then you'll be excited by it and you'll be engaged in it. And so the diploma has always been a way of supporting it. So in the diploma system, tutors support us as individuals doing designs in order to learn how to do designs. You do a design, you learn some things, you write about what you've learned, and then you do more designs. And some of those designs are happening at the same time. So you don't do one and then finish it and then do the next one and then finish it. So you can work them in parallel as well. Yes, I mean, and you don't have to do the diploma. It's just the diploma is a way of supporting you in learning about permaculture. And so for me, when I finished my diploma, I was there was a celebration of I finished, and then, oh, but I don't get a tutor anymore, which was interesting. But then I ended up becoming a tutor, and then you hang out with other tutors and you keep learning from each other. So yeah, so I'm very much in the diploma system, although I don't do so much at the moment because I'm writing my book, but I'm one of the senior tutors in the British system. So yeah, but I would recommend, whether you do a diploma or not, just do some designs. You don't need to share them with people. Do a design, learn from the design. One of the interesting things is that putting your diploma, if you do a diploma and you put your designs online, your portfolio online, which I did, I did after having made a CD originally, then it's a kind of interesting, because often people create a portfolio to sell their skills. And so if you're a landscape architect or something, this is my portfolio of designs, and you want them all to look great because you want people to think they're a great designer. But within the diploma system, we're wanting to say, what was your first design, your second design? How are you getting better? So you need to have your first designs that are not very good all the way up to the designs that you do at the end, which are obviously much better because you've learned from doing the early designs. And then to put that online is kind of a bit scary, because but I'm putting up designs that are not very good, and people might think I'm not very good. But that's what the diploma process is about showing your learning rather than saying, this is what I can do. Does that make sense? So.
But putting in another way, like, do you have extra sheets for your diploma students? Because at the beginning you said that your book was originally coming from the sheets that you developed as notes for your PDC. So do you have extra sheets for diploma students?
No,
or your
no.
second book is gonna be kind of
well, yes,
for the
that
diploma?
would be the, yeah. I mean, the second book is to go deeper, but it's deep permaculture. But yeah, this book is always very much about something just to support people in doing designs. And of course, you know, Luby's books on cultural emergence, design, permaculture, and what's it, Design Adventure is her latest one. You know, they're all inspirations to apply permaculture thinking to designing things. So, and mine most obviously works with land-based designs, but I think you can still think sort of outside the box a bit with that. Yeah. So yes, when my new book is finished, and I do have some videos on my channel. Is it on my Vimeo channel? It's probably more on the Vimeo channel, which are things like if I do a talk, like at the Welsh Permaculture Festival in the autumn, I did a talk about deep permaculture, so that I do have some things that go up online that you can watch that aren't necessarily there on my YouTube channel for lots of people to see. But if you're involved, if you come along, and I'll send people the link, and then they can go and watch it. So if anyone's interested in that, I'm always happy to share that. That's just an overview of what the book is about and how it can be, the thinking can be applied and so on. Yeah. So yes, in sitting down with people, then we can talk about things and how to go beyond this. But there's plenty in here to be doing diplomas and designs and things. So definitely start with that.
Thank you.
Yes, I think we are at the end of our club meeting. Thank you for all the organizers for the club and the background people and the participants as well, and of course for you. Thank you so much.
So it's been a great pleasure. Been a great pleasure. It's lovely.
Loads of hearts are flying.
I don't know how you do it. How do you make them go up the screen? I've never seen it.
You say you do it with effect, and it's gonna.
I can be quite technical, but sometimes I look and say I have no idea how you're doing that.
Look at those. Okay.
Lovely. Excellent.
So have a lovely end of year. Design your next year.
Yes, absolutely. So the winter is a brilliant time to just spend time going inwards, thinking, dreaming possibilities, think about what you want to design for next
Of course,
year.
buy the Hungarian book and
Yeah, absolutely.
the present and suggest it to your friends
present.
as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And Aranya, please send me the links that you mentioned, and I will edit to the video records. Is it okay?
Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, I shall.
No. And everybody can come and say a nice personal
as
hello.
usual.
Lovely to see you all.
And would you make a screenshot and go, go, go. Okay, is that all of you? Okay.
So Aranya, I hopefully see you at some point, either in the UK or either at the European Convergence, if it's gonna happen, or maybe in Hungary.
Yeah. Yes, I always love going to convergences in person. This is great, but it's not as good as being in a room together. I always love that, being in a room with people, having convergences. That's lovely. So yeah, I look forward to that. It will be lovely. Whenever.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again.
Right. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you in
Bye.
Hungary. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.